And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and it's time for another deck tech, and I got a really interesting one for you today. This is a Chromium the Mutable deck. I mean, it is and it isn't. So Chromium the Mutable for a white, a blue, and a black. 7/7 Elder Dragon with Flash. This spell can't be countered, has flying, and you can discard a card until end of turn. Chromium the Mutable becomes a human with base power and toughness 1/1, loses all abilities and gains hexproof. It can't be blocked this turn. So very interesting commander. I've actually built a couple of decks with Chromium. You know, it's one of those commanders that I think people aren't exactly sure where to go with it, mostly because of that very unique discard ability that it has. I think a lot of people will just do sort of an Esper control deck, and then Chromium is like the Voltron commander that closes out the game. But this deck is not really built around Chromium. This deck is built around not one, but two of my 10 deck ideas videos. So this is sort of a bonus deck tech from those 10 deck ideas videos. The number 2 vote getter from each video, in actuality. For my first 10 deck ideas video, Haakon Stromgald Scourge, the idea I had for him where I thought he should be in the 99. He's just so good in the 99 of certain decks. And because he has that very unique, very powerful ability of being able to cast night cards from your graveyard, you really could build a deck around him. And the number 2 vote getter from my second 10 deck ideas was the Volrath Shapeshifter idea, where again, I just thought it was such a fantastic card to build around, where you can make the top card of your library all sorts of interesting different creatures and manipulate that top card of your graveyard depending on what you want to be doing or reacting to whatever your opponents are doing. And I had a guy in that video ask me, okay, what would be the commander for this deck? He said, you know, you have Volrath's Shapeshifter and you have Tortured Existence, which was essentially sort of the combo in that deck, where now I can just pay 1 black mana and keep swapping out the top card of my graveyard to turn Volrath Shapeshifter into different things. And I answered him, I said, okay, well, you're black and you're blue already. That's a guarantee. And I think you also want white, because white is going to have a lot of those really fantastic creatures like Elish Norn and Avacyn that you can be turning your Volrath Shapeshifter into. So I think the deck is probably going to be Esper, and Esper is usually pretty good colors for manipulating your graveyard. And then I remembered that in my first 10 deck ideas video, I had recommended Chromium as the commander for my Haakon deck, because Haakon was also using a lot of stuff in blue and white. So then I started to think, okay, I basically have 2 creatures here that I sort of want to build my deck around that are dealing with a lot of graveyard manipulation, and they can have the same color combination and the same commander, because again, our Chromium has that discard ability, and having a discard ability on your commander is great for Haakon because he needs to be in our graveyard. Also works good with Volrath Shapeshifter because again, we can just quickly discard a card to our Chromium to turn Volrath Shapeshifter into that creature. So I thought, why not combine the two and just make this really interesting sort of graveyard type manipulation deck? So let's get into it. So first off, of course, we do have Tortured Existence in the deck. It's going to be great for both Haakon and Volrath Shapeshifter. There's also going to be other cards we want to chuck in our graveyard. Court Hussar is one of the ones that I thought was fantastic. 2 and a blue Vidalcan Knight 1/3 with Vigilance. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them in your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. When it enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless you paid a white mana. So we can pay the white mana, or we can just not pay it and it'll get sacrificed and go right back. And because it's a knight, if we have our Haakon in play, we can just continually play this from our graveyard every turn. Just 3 mana. We look at the top 3 cards of our library, put one in our hand. I think that's pretty darn good. I'm also going to throw Phyrexian Reclamation in this deck because we are doing a lot of creatures back and forth from the graveyard. Sometimes we want them in our graveyard, sometimes we want them in our hand, sometimes we just want to cast them. Tormod the Desecrator is also going to be fantastic in this deck because we have those creature cards constantly leaving the graveyard. So every time we do so, we're going to create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Obviously, we want lots of that stuff that is putting stuff into our graveyard, like Buried Alive and Entomb, Cards like that are going to be obviously really key, especially since we can just entomb and put our Haakon directly from our library into our graveyard, which is exactly where we want him. Or if we have our Volrath Shapeshifter in play, we can quickly pay 1 and basically turn our Volrath Shapeshifter into any creature in our library. Auric Lore Mage, again, is another fantastic card in this deck because it can just repeatedly going and getting stuff out of our library to put in our graveyard that we want to use. Like, say, for example, Nameless Inversion, which we can go get, throw it in our graveyard, and then repeatedly cast it with our Haakon because it has Changeling. It is a knight card, even though it's not a creature. It is a knight, so we can constantly cast this from our graveyard and either pump our creatures with it because it gives +3, -3 until end of turn, or typically I think you're probably going to use it as a removal spell. Crib Swap is another way we can do this. Again, if our Haakon's in play, we can constantly keep casting it over and over again from our graveyard. So that's one of the combos we can use there. Sidious Dreams is a fantastic tutor for a deck like this. It's 3 and a black instant. As an additional cost to cast this spell, discard X cards, and we can search our library for X cards, shuffle our library, and put them on top in any order. So this is a tutor, and then also the advantage of we throw some stuff in our graveyard that we want in there. And then of course, because our Haakon is casting night cards from our graveyard, we got to throw Arcane Adaption and Ashes of the Fallen in here. Arcane Adaption is going to make sure all of our creatures, whether they be on the battlefield or anywhere else, are going to be knights. And Ashes of the Fallen is a 2-mana artifact, and as it enters the battlefield, we choose a creature type, so we're going to choose knight, and each creature card in our graveyard is going to be a knight in addition to its other types. So this also will allow us to cast any of our creature cards from our graveyard if we want to. Dimir Doppelganger is going to be sort of a pseudo Volrath Shapeshifter a little bit. We can pay 1, a black, and a blue to exile a creature card from a graveyard, and Dimir Doppelganger becomes a copy of that card, except it has this ability. We can use this on our opponents too. This is really just a fantastic card that you can put in any deck because it is graveyard hate. It also turns itself into any creature you want that's in someone's graveyard. But in this deck, it's going to be particularly fantastic because if we don't have our Volrath Shapeshifter, we can pitch that Avacyn into our graveyard and then quickly exile it with our Dimir Doppelganger, and then now we have that Avacyn in play. So it's a way that we can, again, sort of cheat that effect that we want off of that creature. Maybe our opponent's about to run us over. We pitch that Blazing Archon into our graveyard with our commander or any of our other discard effects, and if we don't have that Volrath Shapeshifter, we can just exile it from our graveyard with our Dimir Doppelganger and get the same effect. God Pharaoh's Gift is another way we can do this. 7-mana artifact at the beginning of combat on your turn. You may exile a creature card from your graveyard. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that card, except it's a 4/4 black zombie and it gains haste. So more so than getting a 4/4 zombie that's attacking, this is just getting the effects that we want. We want that Elesh Norn effect. We can exile it from our graveyard, and now we have a 4/4 Elesh Norn, right? We want these cards more for their effect than for the fact that they're a big creature. Tidespout Tyrant is another great one. We can pitch it in our graveyard, and then our God Pharaoh's Gift will exile it, and we get a 4/4 copy of it, and every time we cast a spell, we can return a permanent to owner's hand. That's pretty darn good. Jin Cataxis is another ridiculously powerful effect where we can copy it with our God Pharaoh's Gift or our Dimir Doppelganger if we don't happen to have our Volrath Shapeshifter, and then we can get the effect of drawing 7 cards at the beginning of our end step and making our opponents discard all their cards. Ideally, we don't want to be exiling cards from our graveyard. These are backup effects to what our Volrath Shapeshifter is doing. However, we also have pull from Eternity in this deck. 1-mana white instant, put target face-up card that's exiled into its owner's graveyard. So now if we exile any of these creatures from our graveyard with God Pharaoh's Gift or Dimir Doppelganger, we can then pay 1 mana, put that Elesh Norn back into our graveyard, and our Volrath Shapeshifter can become a copy of it, or we can cheat it into play, or whatever else we might want to be doing with it. It's just a great way to put any of those exiled cards back into our graveyard, so that's going to be a fantastic fit in the deck. Also, Body Double is going to be a fantastic fit in the deck. 4 and a blue Shapeshifter. You may have Body Double enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature card in a graveyard. Again, we can copy our opponent's creatures in their graveyards with this, but probably the creatures in our graveyard are going to be the ones that are the best. You know, we're going to have something like an Inkwell Leviathan in our graveyard, which is a 7/11 Island Wonk trample creature with Shroud. So I doubt our opponents are going going to have better creatures in their graveyard than we are. So basically, this deck is just an Esper graveyard manipulation. You know, I'm sort of doing a lot of things here at once where I can put stuff into my graveyard that I want there. I can cast stuff from my graveyard if my Haakon's in play. I can do the combos with Court Hussar or Nameless Inversion with my Haakon, or maybe I'm casting Ashes of the Fallen and turning all my creatures in my graveyard into knights, so now I can cast all of them from my graveyard. I'm also manipulating my graveyard to turn my Volrath Shapeshifter into all these different cards, and my commander is basically a discard outlet. I mean, you can also use your commander to close out the game with. Because it is a 7/7, it has that magic commander damage number where I only have to attack with it 3 times, and it is really hard to kill, so you can just close out the game with your Chromium, but mostly it's there because it's Esper colors, obviously, and it also has that discard outlet, which is so important in this deck. So there it is, just a bonus video for you guys from both my 10 deck ideas, the first one and the second one. I basically combined 2 of the ideas together to make this really interesting deck. And just a heads up, my next 10 deck ideas video will be coming up pretty soon, and it's going to be a doozy, so stay tuned for that. I have some really interesting ideas this time. It's essentially going to be a challenge edition, right? It's going to be some really challenging and interesting deck ideas for you guys to play with. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.